back again. Today in this video we are going to discuss about accessing the Azure Data Lake storage. So in this we are going to access the Azure Data Lake storage Gen-2. So now that we have a good understanding about the Databricks notebook, which allows us to write the code and also clusters that gives us the compute capacity required to execute the notebooks. It's time to discuss about how to access the data storage from Databricks so that we can process the data and again insights from the data in Azure Databricks. So we generally use Azure Data Lake Storage Gen2 as a data lake storage solution. So in this section of this course, we look at how to access data from Azure Data Lake Storage Gen2. So there are a number of ways Databricks can authenticate to Azure Data Lake Storage Gen2, and we will look at the most of these patterns here, and this is going to be the high level overview. So please don't worry about if you don't understand anything. So each Azure storage account comes with an access key, okay, and that we can use to access the storage account, and also we can generate the special special kind of key called shared access signature, or otherwise referred as a SAS token. And this SAS token we can use that to access the storage account. SAS tokens lets manage access and at more angular level than the access key. So we can also create a service principal. This is a service principal and gives the required access for the data lake to service principal and use those credentials to access the storage account. So all of these options, three options, can take two forms. The first one is to use these credentials in the notebook and authenticate to the data lake. The authentication in this scenario will be valid for just for the duration of this session, that is until the notebook has been detached to the cluster. This is called the session scoped authentication. The other option is to use these credentials in the cluster and authenticate from the cluster. So the authentication will happen when the cluster starts and it will be valid until the cluster has been terminated. All the notebooks connected to this cluster will have access to the data. Okay, so this is called the cluster scoped authentication. Apart from this, there are two more forms of authentication patterns available in Databricks. Let's get into it. So the first one is called the AAD pass-through authentication, otherwise referred to as the Azure Active Directory pass-through authentication. As you can see, there is a Azure Data Lake Storage Gen2 and AAD pass-through authentication here. In this pattern, we just need to enable the cluster to use Azure Active Directory pass-through authentication. So we need to enable this cluster to use this Azure Active Directory pass-through authentication. When a user runs a notebook, the cluster will use the user's Azure Active Directory credentials and look for the roles that are need to be assigned. The user has been assigned to the Azure Active Data Lake storage using IAM or identity and access management. If the user has the access to the storage account, it will allow the user to access the storage account. Otherwise, the user won't be able to access the storage. So AAD pass-through authentication is only available on the premium workspaces. And the last one is the most recent addition to the Databricks called the Unity Catalog. In this access pattern, the admin can define the access permissions for an user using the Databricks Unity Catalog. An user when an user is when a user is trying to access the storage account, the cluster will check the user's access in the Unity catalog. If the user has the required permissions, then it will allow the user to access the storage account. Otherwise, they won't be able to access. Again, this is only available on premium workspaces. So to understand all these patterns, we are going to need an Azure Data Lake storage. So we will create that in the next lessons. In the following lesson, we will look at using access keys to access the storage from the notebook. So it will be a session scoped access. We will then look at using the shared access signature. This is the shared access signature, and then using the service principal, and they will both also be done from the Databricks notebook to enable the session scoped access. We will then look at establishing cluster scoped authentication, and this cluster scope authentication. In this following lessons, we will demonstrate using Azure Active Directory credentials pass-through authentication to access the data lake. Some of these options are only available in premium workspaces, and also student subscriptions doesn't allow you to create the service principal. So in this last session, I will recommend you to use the access patterns for you to use depending on the subscription and the access tier of your workspace. So we are not covering access via Unity catalog here, but if your organization is using Unity catalog, and you will be accessing the data in the same way as you are in any of these other options, by the end of this lesson you will be familiar with all of these access patterns and how to use them. Okay, so I hope you understand from this part. So let's discuss the remaining part in the upcoming lessons. Please subscribe.